Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland.
And I'm Dallas Jones.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, the politics of the millennials. So, Dallas, you're kind of a millennial still for at least the next couple of days. So what does that all mean?
Well, you know, tomorrow I no longer am a millennial, but I mean, what it means is we see things differently, Gary. I mean, you know, even our producers saw the need for millennials, so they sat me next to you.
Yeah, well, I think you're a great addition.
Who do we have with us today?
Well, we have Ben and Ray, and you want to start with Ray?
Sure. And actually, I'll start with Ray, but for both of you, I would say the question is in regards to our politics today. What is it? Not necessarily from the left or the right, but what is it as a generation that millennials care about? What do you think is the commonality in the politics of millennials today?
Well, so first, thank you guys for having us on. Both myself and Ben, we haven't been back together since that mayoral forum back in 2015. But I'll say that I think first thing is millennials is a wide spectrum. And it's very hard to pin us into a box. We don't like labels. We don't like to be bound to this party or this ideological thing. But you do have things like healthcare, gun control, climate control, jobs, economy. All those things are very important to us. Even you're talking about human rights, women's rights, reproductive rights, things of those nature. Because I've been talking to some of my peers, and you'd be surprised at the wide range of things that are actually of concern to them.
Would completely agree. Gary, Dallas, thank you for having us on. Just to echo Ray. I think in commonality amongst the issues, it's usually the ones that I think have a forward impact, if I had to just bucket it to Ray's point. So that's climate change, it's healthcare in America, it's affordability in America. Think about us trying to afford a middle to upper income lifestyle and the challenges that it's causing, both inner city and outside. And then one other one I would add is education in America, both the public school system here in Houston and across the state in America, but also to higher education and affordability of higher education in particular.
Do you find, Ray, that in millennials, the age is supposedly 23 to 38? Sorry to label you. That's the age of millennials, which is, like you said, a big, broad swath, 15%. Right. It's increasingly a significant factor in elections because of the number of voters.
Yes.
But the concept that Ben had mentioned about the difficulties with having the middle-class life that everyone would, or better, that people aspire to because of the way things are, is that one of the reasons I read that millennials are waiting longer to decide to get married, waiting longer to decide if they're going to have children and having children? Is that a factor?
I think it's a combination of things. We do not subscribe to the norms of our parents. I have these conversations with my elders all the time, and we just agree to disagree, quite frankly. We don't feel like we have to be married by a certain age. We don't have to necessarily purchase a home by a certain age. And when we do purchase properties, it may be for an investment purpose, maybe an Airbnb, some type of mixed use. So there's different types of things I think we're focused on. We definitely enjoy travel. We're trying to live life to the fullest right now. And so I think it's a balance. Those things are still important to us when you look at it from a value perspective. We just feel like it can be put further down the road versus having to do it right now.
Absolutely. And think about it from the political standpoint, Gary. So I always heard that when you're younger, you're more liberal. When you're older, you're more conservative. And that echo, or that tipping point was always when you got married or you bought a house or you bought a car. Well, to Ray's point, I mean, our generation just isn't doing that earlier like our older generations are, our parents and our grandparents. So I think that does have kind of a political context too. Our generation's very disruptive, it's innovative. The average person that's under 30 will have multiple jobs and multiple companies by the time they reach 30. So I think the politics of our time is changing with the generation and our behaviors, certainly.
And yet, this is really a follow-up to my initial question, which is, my question was about the commonality. Now, hearing what you all are saying right now about us, right? What makes some of us run to the left versus some of us that do run to the right as millennials?
I think it's really just about who's speaking to our issues. Me and Ben were talking about this earlier. There's a lot of issues that need to be fixed. We don't care who fixes them, we just want them fixed. And so whether it's climate control, when you're looking at those that skew younger, and they are going to actually have to deal with the consequences of what's going on in the climate. And then even when you look at my generation or the older spectrum of millennials that came out during the Great Recession. You know, when I came out of school, I had classmates that went to Wall Street and lost everything. And so we're really looking to Ben's point at those that are focusing on things that have that forward impact and really make a difference in terms of what's going on in our day-to-day lives.
And think about, too, how candidates or political parties, how you're messaging to this generation. That, I think, was a big gap. And as a pretty active Republican, I've seen our parties getting a little better, but there's still a big room to go. And that is, how do you talk to millennials in social media? How do you talk to us via video, via Twitter? Different echo chambers of how we're receiving information. I think the political parties are just getting around to that. So it's, to Ray's point exactly, it's the issues that matter, but then it's how you talk about those issues, which I think really will gravitate to millennials.
So then President Trump is actually the classical millennial politician because he communicates by Twitter. Is that what you're telling me?
I would say that there's some validity in that, Gary. Honestly, yeah. I think there is. A lot of people, Ray and I were actually talking about this earlier too, there's a lot of people that are millennials that do support the president, and they do it because he is a little disruptive in the way he communicates, and people find some humor in it. Some don't, but that is a way to speak to millennials, and it is quite effective. And he got more of the millennial vote than his predecessors have. The last Republican to win the youth vote was Ronald Reagan. So Donald Trump, I think, is etching a little bit away at that millennial vote.
So I'm only going to go this direction because you volunteered the fact that you're a Republican, and I would ask a question to Ray. Now,
he might be a Republican too. You don't know.
Well, I happen to know him personally. And which party are you a member of?
Well, so I'm here representing the Urban League, so I'm nonpartisan.
I understand. There you go. I understand that. However, okay. So let me ask you a question.
Nonpartisan.
Are you a supporter of President Trump?
So I am not a supporter of President Trump, but it's not necessarily again about party, it's about policies, the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House, and unofficially polling some of our peers that fall within his demographic. A lot of them do not like a lot of his messaging, even though they do appreciate the fact in some instances that he does use social media. You can question the manner in which he does it, but that is something that is critical when you're talking about trying to connect with our demographic. And when you ultimately look at, why do we tend to lean more progressive, or I think it is because most of the individuals who are talking to those issues tend to be on that side. And they've shown a track record or a genuine interest in doing so. It's one thing to come out and say that you want to do these different things, but does that really line up with your track record? And in a lot of instances, that may or may not be the case.
Well, Ray, you're happy that the president has created an economy that has benefited minorities to most significant in like the last 50 years in terms of low unemployment for African Americans, Hispanics. That's important. But
I would say, Gary, I think our party does need to do a better job at speaking about conservative ways of solving the big problems that matter to millennials.
Yeah, I agree.
There's no doubt about that.
Let's run Ray. I say let's run Ray. Common sense, and part of his politics is common sense. Here's an interesting question. I'm a baby boomer. Okay.
Never would have guessed.
I know you wouldn't have guessed that, but it's true. Okay, so I'm that other generation. Okay, and so how do millennials see what the baby boomers are basically handing them in terms of the shape of the country, et cetera?
I think it's a big deal. I think entitlements being the first and foremost. I mean, you talk about we're paying into Social Security, and is it going to be there? There was a statistic that came out from I think it was the Department of Treasury that said that it was going to be default in just a number of years, and you're talking less than decades. It's like 15 years from now. So it's a big problem, and I think to Ray's big point, I think millennials are just really frustrated that government can't solve these problems. That despite the party, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you may be, that we can't fix this, and we should be able to, and we're the inheritor of that. So for us, I think it creates more frustration than apathy, but it's still frustrating, right?
Is part of the frustration with the system, Ray, that the closest thing, it seems, to eternal life on earth is someone who gets elected to Congress or the Senate, regardless of party, and stays forever?
So yes, there's a number of different frustrations. I think one, when you talk about what we're being left with or inheriting, I've again had these conversations with elders in the community, and they continue to impress the importance upon us to fix things and right things. But I always push back in terms of like, how did we get here? And some of them are more willing to acknowledge that they did drop the ball than others. And they're also willing to actually sow into young people like myself and Ben to actually show us the map to how do we get to a better place in terms of things that they saw that they tried that did not work, so that we can kind of expedite that learning curve. I would like to see more of that behavior from baby boomers in a lot more instances. But, you know, it's something that I think we're continuing to work on. We found instances where it really works. And we're trying to press forward based on those cases where we have found success.
Do you believe that there is a genuine desire for those that currently possess power to actually cultivate a culture of leadership to follow them, or is it a good talking point?
Good question. I think it's hard. It's hard to say because different leaders have different approaches. I've seen it, certainly. I mean, I think I've said this before to Gary. That's the reason I got involved, is somebody opened the door for me and said, get involved, be active on a campaign. This was a younger candidate, but I've certainly seen it in the Republican Party. Do we need to do a better job of it? Absolutely. Do we need to message that young people should be more involved in the arena? Absolutely. But it's a kind of a hit or miss from some candidates, some elected officials, and certainly not others.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've seen instances of it, but I do kind of question in some places, is it genuine or is it just for show to say, oh, I have this young professional or this young leaders program, but what are you actively doing to actually put them in a position to succeed you or take on one of those seats? I've been fortunate, at least here within the community, I've had individuals like a Judson Robinson, who's the CEO of the local Urban League, who has sown into me and taken interest, because I've been volunteering with this organization for now 10 years. And now your fraternity brother, President Mark Morial, our national CEO, he has now taken me under his wing. And so I've seen several instances of it. I think, again, to both myself and Ben's point, there's not enough of it. I think there are instances where they feel threatened or that someone is trying to take their seat or their position. And in some cases, that is the reality. But other instances, those that are more secure in their seat and where they are as a person, they are genuinely and actively seeking to do so. And you can see it based on the fruit that they leave, so to speak.
And yeah, I was going to mention, you got examples. I'm not going to mention any names because there's people like this in both parties, but we have a county commissioner who's been elected to office for over 30 years, been around forever. You have congressmen who've been around for 20 and 25 years, don't ever seem to be very effective, but they keep getting reelected because they show up at funerals. No. I mean, it's part of this is where is the part of this is, I know you're working on this, where's the opportunity for your generation to step up? As you two correctly pointed out, the problems we're talking about today are not going to be the problems my generation is probably going to solve. It's going to be felt based on your shoulders. It's going to come to y'all to deal with it. So the sooner you all get a chance to have a stake in the game and have the ability to affect policy, the better off I think the country's going to be. I really do.
You do realize there's only one county commissioner that's been there for 30 years, right?
I do.
You should have just named a name.
Sorry, I had to get you.
The group that I represent.
I didn't mention any names.
The group I represent, Maverick PAC. So we were kind of formed out of that premise. So it was this idea that young people shouldn't wait. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Elise Stefanik from New York, Dan Crenshaw from Houston. This idea that wait for what? Wait for somebody to open the door for you? It doesn't happen all the time. And if these problems are going to persist, which they have for decades, young people need to be at the table to offer solutions and offer some action and some passion to get things done. So that's one of the things I think my group is most proud of, is we support young people federally for office to help solve some of the problems in Congress.
One of the problems we have in Washington, as we know, is the inability to communicate across party lines. So that pretty much is gone. You can't work together on legislation. You can't work together on much of anything. Right. And for that reason, we see that nothing really gets done in Congress. I mean, yeah, we have closed-door impeachment inquiries, but nothing gets done. We still haven't passed a budget. I mean, all these things, all these issues we're dealing with, nothing gets done. Is it possible that if we let your generation move in, and not the crazies like AOC, but common sense people.
Careful, choose wisely.
Yeah, she's crazy. Crazy like AOC. People, no, folks like you, I assume you're liberal, I assume you're conservative, but you seem to be able to communicate and work together. If we had more people like you in Washington, couldn't we actually solve problems?
So I think that one of the things you'll find with our generation is we are more likely to work together and to find common ground. We're not as rooted in a lot of the things that our country was birthed out of. When you're talking about slavery and racism, we're not as bound to a lot of those things. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in our demographic, but it's definitely not to the level of baby boomers and some of our predecessors. And so I think, and I'm very confident in stating that, yes, young people, young professionals, millennials, if we were, I think, the majority, when you're talking about our leadership, we would definitely get a lot more things done.
I would just say bring it a little closer to home. I'm a little skeptical of anything coming out of D.C. these days. Maybe call me just naive or just tired because things haven't changed for a long time. But I do believe young people running for city council, running for the county commission, running for the state legislature, I think that's where you're going to see real change, is get involved at a local level, because that's the best way to work with people. Parties don't really matter at that point because you're just trying to solve the problems that you see in front of you. And then hopefully that scales up to D.C.
Yeah, and I was going to say, to that point, we have several young people who are running for office in this municipal election, statewide as well. And to Gary's earlier question, some of the other ways we try to position people to be developed is boards and commissions. You have the TERS. There's a lot of different things that they can serve on to be prepared and get that type of substantive training, coming through organizations like the Urban League or the Maverick PAC that are developing people and giving them those skills and those opportunities to learn how to public speak, how to organize, and how to make change.
I do want to, I do want to push back on what you said, Gary. Politics aside, no, seriously, politics aside, whether you agree with her or not, the reason you mention AOC is because she's young and she's changing things, and she's she's making people listen to what she has to say, whether you agree with her or not. And in that process, she even somehow managed to get a Republican to work with her on climate change, right? And so at the end of the day, to their point and to mine, I think the point is, regardless of the politics, young people are willing to go in there and shake things up. She's one of 535 members of the United States Congress, and you chose to mention her of all people.
Well, that's just the media has given her so much publicity, and so are the Republicans who'd like her to be the face of the Democratic Party for this election, because they figure that if that's the case, the Democrats will
win. And you have to give her credit. I mean, like, she's a young person who just got to Congress. She's a freshman, and people listen to her. I would just argue to Gary's point that I think they ought to be judged on what they do, not how many Twitter followers they have.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, there's I think a formula there, because at least when you look at not what she's done in office, but how she got elected, there was someone who was an incumbent, long-standing, deemed as electable. She met none of that criteria, and yet she was able to overcome, to galvanize people around whatever her issues were to get elected to office.
Yeah, because he didn't campaign, and only 12,000 people voted in a congressional primary. But that's why he lost. He didn't take her seriously. He violated the cardinal rule of politics: is every opponent should be taken seriously.
But I think at the end of the day, all of us as observers of politics and government realize that most freshman members of Congress are not going to be passing goo-gobs of legislation. So let's not change the standard.
No.
But going back on topic, right?
Yes.
Right. Going back on topic, in terms of the politics of millennials, what's your biggest concern about the future of the country from your perspective? What is your number one concern?
Mine is apathy. The people in my bucket, our generational bucket, they become tired and frustrated. They turn on the national news and it's the same story every single day. It's not one they feel like they can make a difference in. So I hear a lot of people that vocalize their opinions, but they don't get involved. And I think prior generations had a little bit of a different attitude, where it was a vocalized opinion with boots on the ground involvement, either running for office and or getting involved in a campaign. My biggest fear is that apathy kind of wins the day, and that our generation does kind of step back and sits in echo chambers like social media and just vents instead of getting more involved. I think that'd be terrible for the country, and it'd be certainly terrible, I think, reputationally for our generation.
I mean, I definitely echo Ben's point, because there's definitely an element of that. When I ask some of my peers in terms of how they feel about politics, a lot of them are very disenchanted with the divisiveness that's going on. They don't necessarily understand a lot of different processes, the mechanisms, the structures, and nobody is really trying to make it easy for them to learn about it. Nobody's really educating them. And so that's something that we're taking on as a task, is to make sure that we are educating people about, what is city council? Why is it important? How does it impact you day to day? And I think for me, one of the biggest concerns is that historically there's a lot of things that have taken place in this country and we have yet to genuinely address them. And so I think until we do that, it's kind of hard for us to really move forward collectively. I think our generation will be okay. But part of what we're trying to do now is to bridge that gap between millennials and baby boomers. It's something I found that I've been able to do effectively in some instances, but there's definitely a lot more work to be done there. Because even to the earlier question about making the electorate or those that are in power much younger, yes, I want to see more younger people, but we still do need the seasoned saints, if you will, that will still provide guidance and wisdom based on, what has come before us. And so there's a balance. But that's probably, I think, one of my biggest concerns.
Okay, so you talked about Social Security being a major concern because of the issues that it has. Is it up to your generation to be the ones who push for reform in Social Security? Some of the ideas I mentioned are raising the retirement age because life expectancy is now so much higher than it was when Social Security was created. That's one idea. There are certainly others. If we don't do anything, then you're right, it's going to disappear. So is that go to your generation to lead?
I think
make
so.
It happen?
I think to your point, Gary, it's just got to be something, right? It doesn't have to solve the problem all in one day. It's move that ball just a little bit further. It's not just Social Security. It's affordability for higher education. It's affordability, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, just to own a home. To raise a family in this city or any other city in America, it's tough. And so I think just common sense solutions to just move the ball forward and talk about the little wins instead of these gigantic ones that everybody strives for, that I think just builds political divide.
So Ray, you all understand then what you'd like to see happen. How do you get there? How do you change what I would call the U.S. government is like what, a giant aircraft carrier? It takes a long way to turn the ship and get it in the right direction. And right now on all these major issues that are concerned to millennials and boomers for that matter, we're not doing anything. Nothing's happening.
I think it's understanding that there is no cure-all. There is no one piece of legislation that is going to sweepingly address all of these problems. I think there's a number of different things that we need to do and reform that's going to get us to where we need to go. Even when you're talking about Social Security, that's honestly not something that a lot of millennials, when I ask them, that's not something that's coming up top to mind.
Yeah, but it will be. It will be when it's announced that Social Security is bankrupt and is closed in 2030, and everyone who's put money in is going to throw up their hands and say, "Hey, what happened to me? I'm not going to get anything." Sure. Then it's a crisis.
So I'm sure that because I don't expect it to be there. I don't think Ben is either. We're not looking for that. We are creatively trying to find ways to build up our investments in our retirement in other fashions. And so I think collectively we really have to come to the table and focus on the issues and not so much, again, getting pulled off task or down these rabbit holes based on the rhetoric that is being spewed out of the White House. A lot of people, they're getting frustrated with, talk about the wall and stuff. They just want stuff, again, to be fixed. We know there's issues. We don't care who fixes them, but they just need to be addressed.
And just think about the worry on Social Security. Our generation lives in the gig economy. A lot of our peers don't have pensions. A lot of them don't have set up 401ks. So think about the reliance on Social Security and then the fact that we're really not planning for it to be there. It is a big problem, and we need to talk more about it for sure.
Absolutely.
I have a question specifically for you, Ray. I coming out of college, the Houston Area Urban League Young Professionals was one of the first groups I joined, and to your point, yes, it actually helped to cultivate me into leadership and understanding the city, and that was me coming out of college. We come from communities where there are so many disproportionately that were not fortunate enough to come out and graduate and join these nice organizations and talk about Social Security and our investments in this and that. With the work that the Urban League does and just the disparity in these communities, particularly communities of color, what are your thoughts on how do we bring them into this discussion of understanding these issues, these millennials that are not like us?
So it's interesting that you say that, because, you know, in some circles, the Urban League is labeled as like bourgeoisie, if you will. And there's definitely an amount of privilege that I can at least say for myself personally, I have been afforded in terms of what my parents did professionally, being a graduate of Morehouse College and now University of Houston with a master's. And so what we're really trying to do is get back to grassroots organizing, and not just, you know, holding these educational forums at our locations, but actually going out into the community, engaging with not just, you know, civic clubs or precinct judges, but actually going into areas like a couple weekends ago, we did a canvassing here in Houston, in South Union in the CUNY homes, and actually going out to talk to them and educate them about the upcoming census. And so I think that when you're talking about really genuinely connecting with people, day-to-day issues, that's what we have to do, and that's what we are doing and will continue to do.
Well, Ray, it looks like you got the last word on the politics of the millennials. Very interesting discussion. Thank you, Ray Shackelford. Thank you, Ben Proler. Thank you, Dallas Jones.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm glad you're a millennial today. We'll be back next week with another edition of Red, White, and Blue.
See you soon.